Yep. Are you guys good? All right, cool. Okay, so Penn's Holy Experiment in Pennsylvania. The Quakers, known as the Religious Society of Friends, were founded at the end of the English Civil War by a religious leader by the name of George Fox. They basically broke away from the Anglican Church of England. However, none of the other religious groups, Puritans, Catholics, really no one else cared for them too much either, due to a variety of reasons. Number one, they quaked under deep religious emotion. They called this the inner light. When they received the inner light of God, they would shake and quake, giving them the name the Quakers. So, because they would shake and quake, a lot of people would call them what? Well, Quakers, but Shakers are a group we're going to talk about later.
Witches?
You're on the right path. Heretics. In fact, a lot of them actually got branded with the letter H on their forehead for heretic. All right? Witches is a good route there. They were dissenters and offensive to all these religious groups due to direct revelation, meaning that they believed that they received a personal message from God. This was heresy in the minds of Anglicans, in the minds of Puritans. They didn't feel like they had to answer to a bishop or a pope or a cardinal or anything like that. Good job over here earlier. They addressed everyone with simple these and thous rather than addressing people by their standard of nobility. They also they refused to take off their hats and bow. In fact, all of us to this day still share a very common greeting that the Quakers brought over. Most of us, when we greet each other, do what? Shake hands. This was a symbol, like in the Quaker community, of equality. They're not the first people to shake hands, but they made it widely popular in their colony. They also refused to pay taxes to the Anglicans. They were dissenters among the Puritans because the initial places that they tried to settle in the colonies created problems. They tried to settle in Massachusetts Bay. That didn't work out, so a lot of them went down to Rhode Island. Some of them also tried to settle in North Carolina and parts of Virginia. But both in England and in America, they were running into problems. They were simple, devout, a democratic people against war. They were pacifists. They also provided women a great deal of power in their congregation. They did not agree with slavery. They believed that Native Americans should be paid for their land. This is a forward group of thinking people, very progressive group, that is ultimately going to secure a land grant in the Americas. Now, William Penn, I want to be really, really clear. I'm not looking for William Penn's dad, the guy that took occupation of Jamaica for England. I'm looking for the son who defected from the Anglican faith and became a Quaker, because William Penn's dad and the Penn family were owed a massive debt by King Charles II after the restoration of the crown. Penn, thanks to what policy, is able to collect the debt? Primogeniture. So Penn is able to collect this debt, and Charles, kind of like his grandfather did with the Pilgrims, is like, oh, this is a decent way to get rid of these people, right? I can give them a land grant, pay off my debt, and these people head to their new colony. So the land grant is actually a lot smaller than you guys would think. If we look over at the map, it's really only the area of like Philadelphia toward like the Susquehanna River Valley, it's not all of Pennsylvania yet. That's going to take some time. Because what country has claims over here? France. Very good. France has some claims out here. We're going to be dealing with that when we move into lesson 5. So we're a little bit a ways away from that. Initially, they were just going to name the colony Sylvania of the Woods. But in honor of Penn receiving the grant for this religious group, they are going to name it Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods. So if you didn't know this before today, anything that has Sylvania on the end of it is of woods. So Pennsylvania, Transylvania, etc. Transwoods, 3 woods. That actually almost became the name of Kentucky. It was initially going to be Transylvania, then it was going to be Franklin, and then they settled on Kentucky. So, don't think that the Quakers, don't think that the Quakers are all like, it's not like a perfect scenario. They did have a little bit of a shady undertaking early on. Bless you. And that was, they created what was called the Walking Treaty, where they did this treaty with the Lenape, Delaware, and said, we only need as much land as it takes a group of Quakers to walk in so many days' time. Well, they ended up finding the fastest Quakers they could get to run as far as they possibly could, which actually ended up giving them more land than they anticipated. This, without a doubt, crew, is going to be the most well-advertised colony of all of the colonies. I mean, they're handing out pamphlets and flyers and putting up broadsides to promote the colony. And we just start to see waves and waves of ships come in, not just bringing Quakers, but bringing other people, because the Quakers believe in what? Equality, right? And religious freedom. So other groups are going to come in as well, and this is going to create some problems for them. So on the left, we have the Treaty of Penn with the Indians by Benjamin West. Oh, and there's William Penn. He looks a whole lot like what guy? Well, he does look a little like Benjamin Franklin, but he also looks like the Quaker Oats guy. The Quaker Oats guy is sort of fashioned after Penn and the Quakers. Who said Quaker Oats? Nice. That's not a bad guess. Kind of looks like him. We're actually going to be talking about Ben Franklin today as well. So Pennsylvania and their neighbors. Yeah.
What group is like the Whigs?
The group that fought over the use of wigs were the Puritans.
Okay.
Yeah. So thousands of squatters already lived in Pennsylvania prior to the arrival of the Quakers. Dutch and Swedes that had come from New Netherland, former indentured servants that had come up from Virginia and Maryland, and the Quakers were kind of cool with it. Hey, great, welcome to our society. Just as long as you follow our law, we're good. In fact, the charter that they put together is going to be one of the most important governmental documents established in the colonial period, and will be one sort of like the Iroquois Great Law of Peace, will be consulted and referenced by the founders heading into the early new nation. Philadelphia becomes their city center. This was methodically planned out with like wide streets, and it was like urban planning in the colonial period that was an even better planned layout than what we saw laid out in New Amsterdam or even Boston. The Quaker Meeting House was very humble. It was what their entire religious community revolved around. The meeting of Philadelphia, which became a legit commercial center surrounded by this wooded terrain becomes known as the city of brotherly love. Now, the tribe that they initially did the deal with were the Lenape Delaware, and the chief that they did the deal with was Chief Tammany or Tammany, whose name meant honor and virtue, which is a little ironic because one of the most corrupt political organizations in American history, Tammany Hall, will adopt that name. We'll talk more about them later. Penn's treatment of the natives was totally nonviolent. Natives could, in the early years of the founding of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, natives could come in and out of Pennsylvania and in and out of Philadelphia without any harm. They traded, they worked together. I mean, even Native American women were hired to babysit Quaker children. I mean, this was sort of a different type of relationship than we saw with other English and Native tribes in the South and up in New England up to this point. But as we said earlier, as more and more non-Quakers arrive, we start to see tension because there are going to be two large groups that come over seeking religious freedom, and they are going to settle in the outskirts of Philadelphia. And those two groups are German Lutherans and Scots-Irish Presbyterians. Are you all familiar with any of the area around Philadelphia? Has anybody been to Philly before or outside of Philly? So like the area of like Westchester, King of Prussia, Allentown, the Lehigh Valley, Susquehanna River Valley, those areas outside of Philly start to be settled by German Lutherans and Scots-Irish Presbyterians. They don't really have the same peaceful relations with the natives in the region. Notably, two groups, Susquehanna and the Mohegan. And warfare is going to unfold. This actually comes to a head in a horribly violent affair known as the Conestoga Massacre, which is where a group of Scots-Irish vigilantes known as the Paxton Boys are going to seek revenge for an attack on their village near the Lehigh Valley, and in retaliation, they go into Philadelphia and they hack up, cold-blooded murder, hack up members of the Conestoga. That was a peaceful tribe that had an alliance with the Quakers. So, again, the Quakers' open-mindedness will cause some problems. Also, I think kind of an interesting thing, too, is when you hear the name, have you guys ever heard of the phrase Pennsylvania Dutch before? It's not Pennsylvania Dutch. It's Pennsylvania Deutsch, because so many Germans settled in the region. And it just kind of becomes this manipulation or mispronunciation. So now you know that next time you go up to Pennsylvania Deutsch, not Dutch. Yeah. All right. So, freedom of worship was allowed to everyone in Pennsylvania with the exception of Jews and Catholics. That was due to pressure put on by the crown under the reign of Charles II and later James II. The death penalty was only instituted for murder and treason. They actually developed, has anyone ever heard of the policy of restorative justice? This means someone is jailed and they're rehabilitated. The Quakers were early pioneers of this system of rehabilitation after imprisonment. No restrictions were placed on immigration. Everybody was pretty much welcome, which again creates some problems with German Lutherans that come in, but most especially with the Scots-Irish Presbyterians, because they're going to wage some pretty bloody war against the natives in the region. The Quakers also absolutely hated slavery, but due to the pressure from the crown over time, after the death of Penn, we are going to see slavery creep its way into the colony. But some of our earliest abolitionists that are going to work alongside African Americans prior to the Civil War for freedom are going to be Quaker communities based out of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia and Pennsylvania were sort of like New York. It was an early melting pot. It attracted a lot of people, not only from different backgrounds and different religions, but also people that were attempting to carve out a life that wasn't in the oppressive religious community of Puritan New England. So a lot of people start to flock there. I'll give you a good example of this. In like a 5-year period, over 100 ships brought settlers over to colonial Pennsylvania. That is absolutely crazy. I mean, we hadn't seen numbers like this since the Puritans that within like a 20-year period brought over 11,000. So the only colony in the original, not 13 yet, but the original 12, because what's the last one that doesn't exist until 1733? No. Of the 13 colonies, Vermont was never a colony. Maine was never a colony. All the way at the bottom. Florida. Above Florida. Georgia. Remember, Florida was Spanish. Georgia is your last British colony. So, in this period of time, of the 12, before Georgia is founded, the only one that's more populated and more prosperous is Virginia. Now, obviously, if we wanted to pull the Caribbean into this, Jamaica made a lot more money than Virginia did. But of that group of American colonies, Pennsylvania caught up quick. Penn, unfortunately, has a hard time in the colony because a lot of the Quakers are upset with his close ties to not only Charles II, but later Charles's brother, James II. And then when Penn goes back to England, he openly challenges the doctrine of the Trinity. That's controversial, right? That gets him thrown in jail. He'll ultimately suffer from a paralytic stroke and he'll pass away. He'll never return back to the colonies. However, the colony will keep on rolling and it will continue to prosper. And it will also lead to the parceling of 2 new colonies that I'm going to explain here momentarily. Question?
Can you elaborate on what the doctrine of the Trinity is?
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay. So, a little flavor here for you. Jersey and Delaware. All right? Here's the deal with Jersey and Delaware. Jersey and Delaware were basically 2 chunks of land that had been handed by Charles II to his brother, the Duke of York. And he basically said, do what you want. It's your call. Figure it out. So the Duke of York, not yet James II, is going to carve out these tracts of land and hook his friends up with them. Those friends are then going to parcel these colonies kind of like what we saw the Dutch do with the patroon ships. And these colonies are all about making money. Notably for farming. It's kind of hard to believe Jersey was a massive farming community, but it was. As was Delaware. But there are 2 very different flavors, right? New Jersey as a farming community is focused on livestock and grain and corn, whereas Delaware tries to focus on tobacco because it sets in the Chesapeake. We also start to see some religious groups come in. Notably, a large religious group that will settle in New Jersey is going to be the Presbyterians. And they're going to establish a very famous university in New Jersey to educate Presbyterian ministers. What is that very famous college in New Jersey, crew? Think about this. A very famous college in New Jersey. It is one of the most sought after institutions, not just in America, but in the world. Princeton. Very good. Harvard's in Massachusetts. Yale is in New Haven, Connecticut. It is Princeton. Nice job. Princeton. Very good. We'll talk more about colonial colleges as we move forward. I'm going to give you a little bit more explanation related to New Jersey and Delaware as we go forward as well. So this is colonial Philadelphia, and this becomes one of the most iconic pieces of architecture in all of colonial America, and many of you all may have visited if you've gone to Philly. It was initially called the State House, or for a time, Carpenter Hall, but it will become what hall? No? Has anyone ever been here? Liberty Bell? Independence Hall, guys. That is where the Declaration of Independence and later the Constitution will be signed. Okay? Independence Hall. All right. Comments, questions up to this point? All right. So, am I moving too fast? All right, cool. So the middle way of the middle colonies, I don't like to define Maryland as the middle colony because Maryland has too much of the same system of economics and politics and all of that as the southern colonies. I wouldn't say religion, even though, initially Maryland was established as a Catholic colony, but it became predominantly Anglican. Maryland is a plantation-based economy focused on the production of tobacco. So I pull them into the South. In my opinion, the middle colonies are New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. All had fertile soil, all had fresh water, all had a broad expanse of land, and all had close proximity to the Atlantic. All except Delaware exported lots of grain and corn. Delaware's main production was tobacco and corn. Delaware ultimately grew as a tobacco, small tobacco farms, large tobacco plantations, chattel slavery in the region. The middle colonies will become the breadbasket due to the high yield of grain, oats, easy way to remember this, Quaker oats, but also the production of beer and whiskey. I'm not trying to be funny and cute about the booze. It's important, especially the corn, liquor, and the rye whiskey. Because if you have all of the things that you need to produce alcohol, especially an alcoholic beverage like whiskey, there's a difference between beer and whiskey. Obviously, you can easily trade beer and use it to barter with, but why is whiskey a better alternative in the colonial period? Good. Yes. Anybody else? It doesn't go bad. You know what I'm saying? Well, I mean, unless you distill it improperly. But it will last, right? And you can use this as what? Yeah, you can drink it, sure. You can use it. You can use it for all types of things, but you can also use it as a commodity to trade with. It's like currency. Okay, does that make sense? That's why this is going to be tremendously important. We're not done talking about this because we're going to deal with this as we move forward. Somebody asked me earlier about wine. Yeah, they're producing wine. Sure, they're trying, they're attempting it. But most of the wine that's being produced just isn't that good. So a lot of the wine that's coming into the colonies is actually being imported in. But when it came to corn liquor, when it came to rye whiskey, when it came to rum, when it came to the production of beer, they were doing that on their own. And the oldest brewery in America is in Pennsylvania. Okay, so the Susquehanna River Valley was the gateway to the fur trade. Truly, the middle colonies, notably, what two commercial centers? Help me out. What two commercial cities in the middle colonies? New York and Philly. Okay, New York and Philly become the two middle trade centers for all of colonial America. I mean, if you look at your top 4 trade depots in colonial America, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston. Yeah, there's others that are important. Richmond will become important. Norfolk will become important. Wilmington will become important. Baltimore was important, but those are the big 4. Boston, New York, Philly, and Charleston. 2 of the 4 are right smack dab in the middle Atlantic. And that's what's going to allow for such economic growth in this region. All right? The land holdings of the middle Atlantic looked a lot like the Dutch patroonships. With the exception of maybe Delaware, you don't see these like large scale plantations with lots and lots of chattel slaves. That's just not the norm. The middle colonies were more ethnically mixed than the others, and the Quakers were much more open-minded, and as a result, lots of people are going to flock to Pennsylvania and flock to Philadelphia. And that takes us on to Benjamin Franklin. He is our colonial Renaissance man. He was born in Boston. Did you know that he was only educated until about 10 years old? I changed the title. Yeah, it was bugging me. Because like the whole thing, I was like talking about Franklin, and I was like, I'm changing this title. I did that this morning. Sorry, I should have said something. Okay, so Franklin has a formal education until about the age of 10, and then they have him working as a candle apprentice. And then when he becomes like a preteen, he goes into the printing industry with his brother. But he's not happy living in Puritan New England. And he and his brother don't necessarily see eye to eye. He doesn't agree with the religious leanings and the hellfire and brimstone of New England. So he packs up, and initially his plan is to go to New York. But there's not a lot of great job opportunities in the printing business in New York, and he's encouraged to leave New York and head to Philadelphia. And when he goes to Philadelphia, not only is he going to get a job as an apprentice, and this, I mean, the crazy thing is, guys, he left with like a little bit of food, the clothes on his back, what little bit of personal belongings he had at your age. He took off at 17 and was like, I'm carving out a life for myself. Not that I'm recommending anyone do that, okay? But I'm saying, he's rolling the dice. He goes to Philly, becomes a printer, he becomes an acclaimed writer, an inventor. I mean, these are just a few of the things that he invented. The bifocals, odometer, lightning rod, the Franklin stove, the glass harmonica. The list goes on and on. Other reasons why he's our Renaissance man, he's responsible for establishing the colonial postal system. He was the editor of Poor Richard's Almanac. He established the first firefighting company in Philadelphia, established the first public library. The first public secondary school was established. He also helped establish the University of Pennsylvania. He was instrumental in the building of Independence Hall. I mean, he had his hand in everything. It's pretty amazing. So American colonists, like Ben Franklin, began to realize not only were they surviving and living longer, but they were thriving. Yes?
So that's like to lead to the revolution.
Yes, for sure. And that's what's going to take us into the French and Indian War, which he's an instrumental part of. Yes?
What's the Poor Richard's Almanac?
Poor Richard's Almanac, the only thing annually that sold more copies than Poor Richard's Almanac, which was like weather predictions, puzzles, short stories.
So just a newspaper, basically?
Yeah, it's kind of like, have you ever seen an almanac before?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit of everything. It's like, I kind of want to bring in an almanac at some point and share. Because we don't have them like sitting around like we
That's
used
such a
to.
general information.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
I think
it has like a variety of things. It's got like daily weather predictions. It's got like, funny quips, short stories, like variety of different articles. The only thing that sold more copies than that annually was the Bible. Yeah. So we're going to talk more about Poor Richard's Almanac when we go into lesson 4, because when I talk about colonial literature, Poor Richard's Almanac has a really important. But did anybody's grow up like grandparents have like an almanac laying around? Okay, yes. That's still, you can still snag one, but if you go to like southern states, they've got them like sitting there at the checkout. I don't know. That was my grandparents always would give an almanac the holidays. It's kind of funny. All right. So, young Ben Franklin, 1748. One of his earliest portraits. Also, like the prediction of like when the sun would rise and set. That was another thing. They would have those predictions. Now you guys have me ready to hunt down some almanacs. So, makers of America, the English. In the 1600s, crew, England, as you already know, this is some prior knowledge from lesson 2. It's under a massive population boom at this time. About 75% of English immigrants that came to the colonies in the 1600s were indentured servants who were either in debt or they were middle class that didn't have prospects to own land due to primogeniture. So they would say, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to sell myself a passage to the New World and see what happens. The problem with indentured servitude is that you don't really know, you have to negotiate your contract. Do you all understand why this is called what it is? I want everybody to take a look real quick. So we have a contract here. I'm going to sign my name on one side. Max, you're going to sign your name on the other. So I'm just going to sell myself to go to the New World. And then what's going to happen here is the contract will be indented. And it will be divided. And obviously we'll have more than just our signatures, but by the end of this whole thing, in order for me to get my freedom, I must finish my contract in order to get my life back.
What if they lost that?
That was a huge problem. Contracts just missing. Or let's say I'm like, middle class kid who learned how to read and write, our negotiation might be a little difficult, right? Because Max might be negotiating for a contract of maybe 7 years. And I'm like, no, I'll do 3, 5 max. No pun intended. So, with that being said, Max might be looking for someone that's illiterate, can't read and write, and can manipulate the contract. This was a really, this is just due to proximity. But this was a huge problem for indentured servants because contracts could be manipulated all the time without the consent or the knowledge of the person that was on indentures. Like if you made a mistake, you could have years added to your contract. And that's kind of the crazy thing. An estimated 40% of indentured servants died before their 7 years was up. You only had about a 25% chance of actually seeing your freedom. But not all indentured contracts are equal. And I'm going to share that with you when we get to lesson 4. I actually have a primary document of someone publishing in a newspaper in England, hey, we need these different types of indentured servants. Please come and apply. We would love to have you, right? This sucked. This life was horrible. You were enslaved for a fixed period of time, okay? On sort of the other end of this, the Puritans are coming over and settling as families. Do they have indentured servants, though? Yeah, they have indentured servants. And eventually, they too will participate in chattel slavery. And as we know, they are also in the business of selling Native Americans into slavery. But the wave of Puritans is just constant. In less than 20 years, 11,000 Puritans land in New England. But remember, they don't all see eye to eye, so it leads to the splintering of colonies from Massachusetts Bay being settled because they push out their religious dissenters. Puritans brought a culture of religion, strong work ethic, and thrift to the Americas. So here we have a group of indentured servants. This is a little bit of colonial folk art here. And what does it look like they're doing? What are they working in? What? Tobacco. Very good. Excellent job. All right. Makers of America, the Iroquois. The Iroquois dominated upstate New York along what Great Lake? Great Lake. These are Great Lakes, and these are good guesses, but no. Huron's a good guess, but no. They dominated the area around Lake Ontario. Okay? In fact, the tribe that dominated Lake Huron was the Huron. That was like one of their sworn enemies, right? That's what brought them together. What brought these 5 tribes together, the great peacemaker and the spiritual leader Hiawatha, brought the 5 tribes together due to common enemies, notably the Huron. These 5 tribes, the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, and the Oneida. These 5 tribes come together, and they're going to create this great law of peace. And they're going to live under this constitution, where they train their warriors through the game of lacrosse. And they lived in the longhouse culture. And women in the tribe had power. And they had not only their own rules and traditions among their own tribe, but they shared a larger cultural and political narrative. Do you guys get along well with your mother's side of the family? Yeah. Those of you that said yes, good news. You would be doing okay in the Iroquois community because you would move in, you'd be living with your mother's side of the family in the longhouse culture. 25 foot wide, 200 feet long longhouses in which your mother's family ran things And chances are your parents would have had you pretty young, so there could have been 4 generations of you all living together in the longhouse. You, mom, grandma, maybe even great grandma, all living. I know, but still, it just depends, right? The women in the tribe, they determined who the chiefs were. These clan mothers truly ran the community. The Mohawk were the middlemen for trade, and the Seneca were the fur traders out of the Hudson River Valley. Are you guys good? Cool. This is where we wrap up. The 5 nations of the Iroquois had rival tribes, notably the Huron, as previously mentioned, the Erie, the Petun, and other Algonquian tribes in the Northeast. The French were also an enemy for a time because the French, very early on, had allied with the Huron. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, the Iroquois allied with both the British and the French, basically whatever one was more advantageous. But what truly ripped them apart was the American Revolution. Because when the Revolution broke out, they had to choose sides. And most of the Confederacy sided with the British. So when the war came to an end and the British lost, they either did one of 2 things. They either left and went north to Canada, or they were confined to what? Reservations. Okay? Ultimately, following the war, an Iroquois by the name of Handsome Lake arose, who was a spiritual leader to warn the Iroquois to mend their ways. And now Handsome Lake's teachings are still handed down to the Iroquois people, and this is known as the Longhouse religion. All right. Questions up to this point? Is everybody good? Okay, so that Iroquois flag initially was not a flag. It was wampum. It was basically beads and shells that were sewn into a sash. Wampum was very important in the Iroquois culture. And then on the bottom right here, this is what an Iroquois longhouse community looked like in upstate New York. All right. Everybody good? Cool.